Hey again, YouTube. Actually recording this on the tail end of the last video I did. I thought I'd get two done, then I don't have to sit and think about it a few days from now, do I? So there you go. This, after my rant, which may or may not have been uploaded before this video, so that may not make any sense whatsoever. So we'll see, won't we, whether this video makes sense or not. I'm fucking tired, as I said at the beginning of the last video, or the following video. It depends. We've got a sort of timey-wimey warpy thing going on here. Nothing to do with Matt. Nothing to do with Matt at all. Insofar as I'm aware. Yes. As I said, I'm really tired. I've just come off of a very long shift at work, actually through the night shift, sleeping. When, for those of you who don't know, I work in social care. I'm a support worker and a personal assistant to people with mental disabilities, and I work very much at a house that's local, and we are required to do sleep-ins, to do night shifts over there. So I've basically been at work since around 5 yesterday evening, and I'm very tired. So you will excuse me if I'm a little bit out of it this video. What I really wanted to talk to you about is, it's something that I'm very much a latecomer to. The closest I came to this when I was a child, and up until very recently, is stuff like Hero Quest, which is a kind of gateway board game to tabletop role-playing. It's sort of tabletop role-playing simplified down to just dungeon crawling and combat. That's basically it, but it's really good fun. I remember having it when I was a kid and loving it. Didn't really understand it because I was too young, but I fucking loved Hero Quest. My mum, my brother, and myself would play it, and some whatever friends I had around. I would always be the wizard. And that has followed me through. In every role-playing game I play, whether it's on the computer, whether it's tabletop, whether it's whatever, regardless of what format it takes, I am always a fucking wizard, always a sorcerer character. I love magic users I absolutely love the subtle characters who are crap in close combat or melee, but can do wonderful reality warping things. I love that. When it's an option. I mean, there are some role-playing games, of course, where that is not an option, like your science fiction or your cyberpunk role-playing games, in which instance I tend to be either a hacker or a sharpshooter. Regardless, I always have very high charisma. I like to talk my way out of situations, obviously. I like those characters who can bluff, who can talk their way into places and talk their way out of situations very, very easily. I love that. And if you've got a good group, if you've got a good role-playing group, and you can actually do it, oh, it's so much fun. It's so much fun. Like I said, I'm a very, very much a latecomer to it. I got into it via Hero Quest, via Space Crusade, via the Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000, that sort of thing, both of which are tabletop war games, really, but which have role-playing elements. They have backgrounds and mythologies and settings that lend themselves, I think, better to role-playing than to wargaming, actually. They're so well developed, they're so characterful, and the worlds are so vivid and so full of opportunity. I've got a couple of the Warhammer 40,000 role-playing games, actually, like Black Crusade. Black Crusade is great. Black Crusade is superb. You get to play as the bad guys. You get to play from the perspective of a band of chaos worshippers, chaos space marines, chaos sorcerers, demagogues, cultists, that sort of thing, trying to undermine the Imperium. It's great fun, and the group dynamics are really fun because you're all bastards. You know, you're all bastards and maniacs. Every single one of you, you're trying to stab one another in the back. You've got your own agendas going on. You may have alliances to different philosophies and different gods. You may have different religions. Oh, so much fun. If you can get a good role-playing group, that is a blast. It's an absolute blast. It's difficult because not many people play it. Trying to get a group together is a pain in the arse. But what I've been getting into recently, which, again, latecomer, is this. This is the monster manual the latest monster manual from 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons is one of those weird things. It was the first. It's the proto tabletop war RPG. It came first, and it's the one that all others after have echoed and egged. In fact, you can certainly find echoes of Warhammer in this, because Warhammer derives a lot from it, hell of a lot. And in turn, this has been influenced by the mythologies that have developed there, and that's really interesting. There's Tolkien here, there's Lovecraft, there's mythology. Anything you can think of is in this world. That's what's so much fun about it. The Forgotten Realms, as they're called, in which Dungeons and Dragons operate, they are ostensibly a fantasy universe that has elves, has demons, dragons, fairies, dwarves, all of that stuff. But it's so much more than that. It's so much more expansive. It has metaphysics. There's entire realities, alternate realities throughout the Forgotten Realms, and you can make them up. That's what's so good about this universe. It's not prescriptive. It's totally not prescriptive. You can incorporate anything in here. This book mentions Cthulhu. It mentions Azathoth. It mentions gods from Olympus from ancient Greece. It mentions gods from ancient Egypt. It mentions ancient Celtic gods. You can incorporate all of them into this, because the universe is so open and so expansive. If you want to create your own little reality in this multiverse, you can do it. So easy. So easy. That's what's so good about it. But what I find particularly interesting about D&D is that it marks a certain cultural difference between the UK and the US. This originated in the US. I think tabletop RPGing originated largely in the US, to be perfectly honest. And it's not much of a phenomenon over here. It's not much of a phenomenon in the UK, and I find that really sad, and I find it interesting. I love the fact that the US has made space for this kind of adult imaginative play, and that's what it is. That's what this is. This is the equivalent of when you used to get your action figures out as kids and create these elaborate scenarios with them, or when you used to go outside and you used to pretend you were, I don't know, knights or cowboys or monsters or whatever. This is that. This is the adult version of that, and it is stunningly fun. It's stunningly fun. I'm so surprised that this is not bigger in the UK. In fact, no, I'm not. I'm really not, because as I say, this marks a massive difference between UK and US culture. The US has made space for that. The US allows for that, whereas the UK just hasn't. It's really sad to say, but it is true. Imaginative play is dying a death here in the UK, and it's to our deficit. It's to our deficit. I did a video about how play is essential, not only for children but for adults, ages ago. If I can find it, I'll link to it. But go back and watch that, because I'll get deeper into it there. But play allows us to do so much. We learn more in play than we do in classrooms. We learn more about ourselves. We allow contexts, new contexts and experiences and abstractions develop through imaginative play. We develop empathy through imaginative play. We project ourselves into abstract situations. Our minds work better as a result of play. Our personalities develop as a result of play, and that's what this allows for. That's what this allows for. And it's so sad that it's much more popular in the US than it is here. I so wish it was more popular here. I didn't know what D&D was outside of the cartoon, the 1980s cartoon, for the longest time, and I didn't really become involved in the role-playing aspect until it was Spoonie. Actually, it was the Spoonie one from the Spoonie Experiment. His fantastic, excellent series Counter Monkey, where he talks about his experiences as a role player and tells stories about what he used to do. I was watching those and I thought, God, that sounds so much fucking fun. That sounds right up my alley. So I went and had a look. I went and had a look at the books. I bought loads of art. I've got a couple of Lovecraft-based RPGs, which are fucking brilliant. Those are fun, man. They're meat grinders. You're supposed to die in them. Or not even die, you're supposed to go mad. There's not much combat in them, but they're great. They're not based around combat. They're more like They're more like atmospheric horror investigations. And if you've got a good DM who can stoke atmosphere, they are so fun because you can actually create an atmosphere of horror, of dread, and your characters go mad. That's what's so much fun. Your characters actually have psychological problems in those games, and the more they see, the more that's weird or disturbing or outlandish, the madder they get. It's awesome. It's awesome. You can do that here too. I mean, there's nothing stopping you doing that in D&D. There is nothing stopping you making a horror-based game in D&D. Nothing. Because as I say, the universe is so expansive. But yeah, it was Noah Antweiler. It was the Spoony one, and I have to take this opportunity to thank him for that series because it is so much. It's so much fun to watch, but it's allowed people to see what this experience is like and to become inspired by it. I mean, up until that series, really, I was only interested in the tabletop war games, or rather, really, I only knew about the tabletop war games. I never really knew much about D&D. I didn't know how you got started in it. It seemed so big and so expansive and required so much time. Actually, you know, it's not that difficult. It's really not. You need the books, you need some dice, you need some friends, and you need some pen and paper and an imagination. And that's pretty much it. You can create a game that will last for either an evening, or you can create a game that will last for months, on and off. It's amazing fun. What I like about it is the fact that there's no real parameters. It all depends. All that really matters are the parameters that your group imposes on themselves, or that the dungeon master imposes. The dungeon master is the person who sets out the story. They set out the scenario, and they keep watch over the game, basically. So the dungeon master will have a written campaign or a written game. They'll have certain events that they want to happen, and they will say to the players who determine their characters, and their characters can be anything. You can make a character out of anything, really. The dungeon master will say, you'll have a fairly simple scenario, like your characters are wandering down a country road, they're quite familiar with it, they've just finished some adventure or whatever, they're coming back, we're laden down with their spoils, when suddenly they notice a town on the horizon, and they're fairly certain there's not supposed to be a town here. So, what do? What do they do? Do they go and investigate? Do they sort of sneak in? Do they go right through the front gate and start talking to people? It's up to them. It's up to them, and that you can play in any way you want. There is nothing limiting what you can do in this game. It's just imagination. I mean, I would advise going and watching the Counter Monkey series by Noah Antweiler just to get an impression of what you can do in these games. The Thieves World videos are particularly good, and particularly good examples of this, because in the few games I've had, which I have really enjoyed, I must say, I've played a couple as a player. I tend to play a sorcerer in this, and sorcerers in 5th edition D&D are fucking brilliant. I love sorcerers. Another great thing about D&D is it's so micromanaged. There are distinctions between different types of magic users. So you have wizards and mages, who are people who learn schools of magic academically. They don't have a natural affinity for magic. They learn it through diligence and so on and so forth, through study. You have warlocks, who are characters that derive magical power through pacts with demonic or otherworldly entities. And then you have sorcerers, and sorcerers have innate affinities for magic. It flows through them naturally as a result largely of their lineage. Like, for example, they might have draconic blood somewhere in their ancestry, or demonic blood somewhere, or even divine. They might have divine blood somewhere in their ancestry. As a result, they can use magic naturally. And all of those magic users use magic differently. They all have different rules. They select spells differently. They cast spells differently. And then you even have paladins running. What's paladin? Running joke. You have paladins and clerics who derive magic from their deities. They derive divine or infernal magic from their deities. and can cast it in different ways and have different spell sets. It's very complex, but it's so much fun to learn about. There's so much to get your teeth into. And then you have this sort of thing. This is a whole book dedicated to monsters, just encounters and creatures and gods and divinities and infernal entities that you might encounter in D&D, and it is brilliant. I am such a fucking geek. That's what surprises me. I'm such a fucking geek, and yet I've never come across this before. Not until very recently. There's so much in here. So, monsters from all over, mythology, from fiction. It's great. It's just a fun read, if nothing else. I'm actually just reading it. I'm just going through it. I've got the player's handbook upstairs. I've got a campaign which was published for D&D, which involves Tiamat, which those of you who used to watch the 1980s cartoon will remember Tiamat. Tiamat was the five-headed dragon from the cartoon who turned up occasionally, who hated the villain, Venger, the sorcerer Venger. She hated him. In D&D, she's not just a dragon. She's a god. She's a goddess. She is the goddess of a particular type of dragon. She is the evil, chaotic goddess of the chromatic dragons. The dragons in D&D all have colours. They're colour-coded. And their colours determine their natures, determine their habitats, their characters, what abilities they have, their strengths, all sorts of things. And the chromatic dragons, the red, white, black, green, and blue ones, are evil. Generally speaking, they all occupy different degrees of malevolence, but they're all generally bastards. They're unpleasant creatures. The black ones are the worst. The black ones are real cunts by all accounts. Whereas there are other dragons who have metallic skins, so the brass, bronze, silver, gold, and there's another one I can't quite remember. Copper dragons are all generally good. They occupy good alignments. That's another fun thing about this game. You have morality. You have a moral system, which is really cool. It's very simple. You have an X and Y axis, and it goes from chaotic, neutral, lawful, good, neutral, evil. So you can have your character will occupy a particular space on that chart. You can have chaotic good characters, for example. And chaotic good characters generally don't follow any moral code. They don't believe in systems or laws or anything like that. They do what they think is right or what they feel is right. You have lawful good characters who are like paladins and clerics who have very particular codes of honor that they adhere to. By the same token, you have lawful evil characters. And lawful evil characters, they may operate in ways that seem harmful or seem malevolent to outsiders, but they follow a code of ethics. They still believe in the law or in prescribed morality. A really good example that I believe Spooner uses in one of his videos is the Empire in Star Wars. The Empire in Star Wars is a really good example of a lawful evil system. Darth Vader would be lawful evil. In that he follows a code. He operates with regards to the laws of the Empire and to the structure of the Empire. Whereas a chaotic evil character would be someone like the archetype is the Joker. Or Kefka from Final Fantasy VI. Kefka from Final Fantasy VI would be chaotic evil. Someone who doesn't have any restraints or restrictions. Someone who just does what occurs to them, regardless of how it affects other people. They have no notion. They are completely insane characters, chaotic evil. But what's fun about it is just because someone is described as chaotic evil or because someone is described as lawful evil, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are villains. It doesn't necessarily mean that they can't occur in your party and they can't do things that benefit the party. I mean, in fact, you can have good characters or characters that occupy the good alignment doing fucking hideous things. Fucking atrocious things. The lawful good characters, for example, who stick rigidly to their set of ethics, they can be incredibly violent, and they can be tyrannical, and they can be despotic. They can be oppressive. A really good example is Keldorn in Baldur's Gate 2. Keldorn is he's a Templar or a Paladin of one of the good aligned deities in the D&D universe, but he is monstrously intolerant. If you have him in your party and a character called Viconia is also a paladin and also a cleric, but she's a cleric of Shar, who is an evil goddess. She is unpleasant. She's terribly unpleasant, and she needles the other characters. She insults them and she tries to get rises out of them. But if you have her and Keldorn in your party, the one who initiates violence against the other is Keldorn. The one who breaks the party is Keldorn, not Viconia. Viconia does as she's told. Even when what you do is good, when it's charitable, or when she finds it distasteful, she does it. She gets on with it. She might insult you, but she gets on with it. And even though she insults the other members of the party, she doesn't usually drive them to distraction. She doesn't attack them. Keldorn does. Keldorn does, because her existence is an affront to his morality. Insofar as he's concerned, she is evil by nature. She's a drow or a dark elf, and they are evil by nature, according to him. And he attacks her, and he kills her. If you let him, he kills her. Or you can defend her and kill him. You haven't got much choice. And it comes as a fucking shock, I can tell you. It does come as a shock, especially if you're trapped in the Underdark, and suddenly your party breaks up because Keldorn, who is really powerful, I mean, he's a really good character to have, but he is the one who initiates violence. And there are examples of that throughout the D&D universe, of systems and of institutions that occupy the good alignment, but do terrible things, or act in a terribly inhumane way as a result of their alignment. It's very interesting. Some of the better written adventures have good characters as antagonists, and that's fun. That's really interesting. Alternatively, you can have lawful evil characters, or even chaotic evil characters, who do well by the party. They may not be nice people, but they do well by the party because you do something for them. You do something that benefits them, or which is mutually beneficial. They even might do something that is generally humane. There are despots and tyrants in the D&D universe who run very tight ships. They like the power, they like their positions of privilege and authority, but the people under them are generally happy and generally safe and productive. They protect their own. They might be evil cunts to whoever comes in from the outside, but they do well by their own. The Drow are a really good example of that, actually. The Drow occupy... anyone who's played Warhammer 40,000, the Dark Eldar are inspired heavily by the Drow, as are the Dark Elves, because that's what they are. They're the Dark Elves. They are backstabbing, violent, murderous sons of bitches. Racial supremacists, hate anyone who isn't a Drow. Actual genuine misandrists. I mean, I actually don't like that term when it's applied out here in the real world, because it tends to be quite whiny, and it tends to not be genuinely applied. It tends to come from people who are actually themselves misogynists, who don't like being called on it out here in the real world. But the Drow they actually are. Males in Drow society occupy very low rungs. They are like... Then, if a male is born to a Drow noble family, they're likely to kill it, or to treat it with disdain. Drow males cannot occupy positions of power. They can't occupy positions of authority. They are the lower classes. It's a matriarchal society, completely matriarchal. It's the priestesses who hold the power in Drow society, and that's because they worship a a demon goddess called Lolth, who also features in the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon at one point, but just as a monster. It's not that she's referred to as Lolth, but it's not really. It's just a monster. She is the spider goddess, and she has aspects that one would symbolically associate with spiders. The eating of the males. She is a schemer and a backstabber, and she is a goddess of lies and deceit and betrayal, and that's how Drow society operates. But it does operate. Even given those factors, it does operate. And as happens in Baldur's Gate, when you are forced to infiltrate Drow society, they don't treat outsiders well, but they do allow outsiders. They don't treat them well, but they do allow them, and it is known for Drow to treat with other races and other species. It's interesting, it's ambiguous. Despite how absolute the application of an alignment may seem, it's ambiguous, and that makes it fun. Because you can have characters depending upon their own storylines and what the players do, what the players come up with for their characters, who change alignment, who shift. Like, you might have a lawful good character who has something terrible happen to them. Maybe their village is destroyed, or maybe their children are murdered, or something like that, and they suddenly do something that maybe their faith is shattered, or something. Maybe they become obsessive. And vengeful, or maybe they become lawful evil from that point on, or at least chaotic good or neutral. And I love that, absolutely love that. And I've come up against it in the few games I've played, the very few games I've played of late. I have so little time to do it. That's the problem. That's the biggest problem with D&D, I find. I have so little time to do it because the people I do play it with, they have their own lives and they're busy. I am so fucking busy with one thing or another, writing primarily, and work, that we don't have much time to do it. But what I would love to do is get together. There are friends I know who haven't played this, but I know would enjoy it. They would enjoy it. I would love to establish a time, at least once a month, where we all get together and we play. Roll some dice, have some drinks, and we play. I'm going to see about organising that, actually, with some of you, because I know you'd enjoy this. I know you would. Just from speaking with you and seeing the types of video games you play, I know you'd like it. This, for me, this kind of thing, this role-playing is what I look for. This is role-playing without parameters. And as good as some role-playing video games are, and they are wonderful, some of them, they will never, ever, ever be as good as this. And the reason they'll never be as good as this is because they have parameters. There are always parameters. There has to be, because of the nature of the medium. Not so this. It's fluid and dynamic and fun and really interesting. And I would advise people to get into it. Just, if you have an interest in mythology, in fiction, sort of fantastical fiction, or anything, or you have an active imagination, I think this would be a wonderful outlet, especially if you're looking for something creative. I think this would be a fabulous outlet. I really do. And just in general, I think as a way of working things out, you could use this as therapy. You really could. As a way of exploring issues and working things out. I mean, psychiatrists and psychologists do this sort of thing anyway. There is a role-playing element to therapy. You can explore parts of yourselves through this, through the imaginative play that you would not otherwise be able to. And that's great. That's amazing fun. You can look at how you would react in particular situations that you haven't, or you can't. Like, for example, you obviously can't encounter in your waking life a dragon or a demon or anything like that. Here you can. And that is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Anyway, I think I've gushed on about this sort of thing enough now. But this has given me some ideas for some new videos, actually, for some other videos. Yeah, I think I'm going to do a couple of videos about imaginative play and imaginative expression and the things you can use to do it with. Until then, ta-ta!